The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Bob Drakowski with On Demand Advisors. It's always a pleasure to have you join us today, and we look forward to our topic. Our topic today is, I think it's going to be a fun webinar for all of us. It's really focusing around bundling solutions for profitability and customer wallet share. So as you know, if you come to our other webinars, we always are talking about revenue acceleration, and that's not going to be deleted today. We're going to focus on revenue acceleration today, but we're also going to talk about how are different ways that you can increase the profitability that you have, not only profitability in terms of your services or solutions that you have today, but also customer wallet share, which I think is really important because many companies that provide services or solutions continue to add innovation, add new services, add new solutions, new modules, whatever. And you see this over time, but the problem a lot of times is they release those capabilities, but there's not the accretive revenue that they're looking for. So consequently, you spend a lot of money on R&D, a lot of money on engineering, and in the end, customers don't necessarily buy the additional solutions or services that you've invested in. So we're going to talk about some innovative ways to bundle, and we want to talk about pricing, how you can think about pricing, and we also want to talk about contracting. So these are really great ways to help create velocity for revenue, velocity for your company, and velocity for your sales. As always, we're going to be recording today's webinar, so if you want a copy of the recording, please let me know, and I'll make sure that we send you a recording in case you want to share this with other members of your management team. Another thing that we always do with On Demand Advisors webinars is we encourage your participation. So if you have questions, please post those questions throughout the webinar to the questions section that we have here with go to webinar. And let us know what questions you have. We want to address those questions today. And if I can't get through all the questions in today's webinar, I'll make sure I follow up one-on-one with each of you as we move forward. So again, thank you for joining us. So I will be facilitating the discussion today along with Craig. And 12 years ago, we founded On Demand Advisors as a revenue acceleration firm. So that's really all we do. We focus on strategically, what do you need to do from putting strategy in practice? And then how do you execute that strategy to grow revenue? How do you do it so that it's predictable, it's capital efficient, and scalable? And we've done this with hundreds of B2B companies. So we're very serial at this. We always bring best practices to our discussions into these webinars with you. And from my perspective, I've been fortunate to lead some very successful public and private software and services companies in Silicon Valley. And Craig has done the same thing as Chief Marketing Officer. So we're just really a great team in terms of sitting down with you, discussing your strategy, and figuring out what needs to get done to actually not only have a plan, but make the plan real. One of my friends in the industry that I work with wrote a book called Hope is Not a Strategy. And I totally agree with that because you really need to have a strategy. You need to have a plan. You need to figure out how it's going to get executed. And you need to be able to look at that plan and say, how are we doing this every week, every month, every quarter to achieve the goals that are important to you? So let's talk about our agenda. The first thing we want to talk about is why is it that most companies do not achieve their potential customer wallet share? And we'll go through that. We also want to talk about what you're going to get from today's webinar. And we're going to break this down into three areas. We're going to talk about bundling options and best practices. We're going to talk about pricing options and best practices for you to consider. And we're going to talk about contracting options and some best practices there. The objective from today's webinar really is to empower you and your company to apply some of these best practices today. So let's talk about a framework. We all need a framework, just like we would need a map if we were driving cross country. We need basically a map that's going to give us a framework on looking at revenue growth, revenue best practices. And the reason we do is because, like many processes that you have in your company today, revenue growth, revenue acceleration is a connected process. It may start in marketing, and it may go through sales. It may involve partner sales as well as direct sales. And of course, it involves delivery. It involves every function of your company. So really being able to master that is probably one of the most important capabilities, assets that every executive is looking for in terms of leading and managing companies today. Now, we created the Revenue Acceleration Map 15 years ago, and we've enhanced it over hundreds of B2B companies as we worked with them. But the notion was to create a map that visually gave you a framework to think about your revenue growth and the connected values. So if you joined us previously, you'll realize that there's 7 areas here, and we've got 3 funnels on the bottom. The first one is your marketing funnel. That's where you create your market qualified leads. The second funnel is how you convert those market qualified leads, which are essentially folks that are interested in your company, your solutions. They express that overtly. How do you convert them into being sales ready or sales qualified leads? And then finally, this funnel here is how do you take these sales qualified leads and opportunities and convert them into customers? So this is a very connected process. We talk about engineering revenue growth because that's what we're talking about all the time. And so in the purple, we have these strategic elements that are important for your company and thinking through the strategy and how you're going to get from where you are today to where you want to get to in the future. The red is marketing, marketing leadership, marketing execution. The yellow is sales bringing aboard sales executives, getting them up and running quickly. And then what are you going to do to accelerate with velocity the sales cycles that you have today? And then finally, number 7 is other what we call revenue vectors. So whether that's putting in place really partner programs that work. I work with companies every day where they have partner programs in place, but they're not driving revenue. They may be strategic relationships, but unless you're going to drive revenue, then you don't get the results you're looking for. And then getting into new markets. So today you may be focused on a market. Let's say it's financial services, or let's say it's mining, or let's say it is healthcare. And so you get some markets today. So you want to really have a strategy to go win that market, but you also want to be looking at adjacent markets. And then finally, something that we'll be talking about today, which is the upsell, cross-sell. So it's not unusual for a company to continue to add more solutions and more products, more services. But the question is, how do you actually go about in a very efficient way, providing that both to your prospects as well as your customers? Okay, so that's a framework that we'll refer to. And by the way, everybody that's joining today's webinar will receive a copy of the Revenue Acceleration Map. So the question is, are you achieving your potential customer wallet share? So when you think about your company today, let's say you have a set of 5 or 6 services that you offer today. Let's say it's 6 services. And then you look at the number of customers that you have today, and you say, how many customers are using those 6 services that you offer? Now, every service may not be appropriate for every customer, but what you're thinking about is most of these services are appropriate for your customer base. So what most companies do is they introduce new solutions, new services throughout the year. And a lot of times they don't have a launch strategy or an upsell strategy to gain that accretive revenue. So we see that very often, and we'll be talking about those instances as we move forward. We also see where many companies are offering different point solutions to solve different needs. So it becomes kind of a tactical sale. The challenge for a lot of companies is that they add more and more tactical point solutions. It's very difficult for their sales team to actually sell those in a unifying manner. So they don't get sold. The third area is probably what we see very often, which is a lot of companies are very good at creating the tactical solution, let's say focused on process improvement or operational efficiency, but they haven't taken it to the C-level or C-suite. So we want to talk about that today because getting the C-suite involved not only as a sign-off for your solution, but as an interested party that wants your solution can be very important to this process. And then finally, a lot of companies, when we see what they've done as far as implementing their services or their solutions, they haven't done a good job figuring out how they're going to measure the return on investment. That is important. So there may be a business case or substantiation around making the purchase, but a lot of times that's not followed up after the implementation. So there's no idea about what are the metrics, how did you move the metrics for the company, what's the monetary savings or value or revenue created as a result of putting in that solution. So I'm not sure about you, but these are some things that we typically find that could be inhibitors for maximizing your customer wallet share. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of these major ideas, moving from tactical to strategic bundling, and we're going to give you some customer examples. I love today's topic because we're going to be talking about a lot of customer examples and just talking about where they were and where they wanted to get to and how we worked with them to facilitate that transformation. We also want to talk about how do you change buyer behavior, and especially when you're presenting your pricing. We're going to talk about accelerating contracting. So if you're selling to the enterprise, especially large companies, the contracting process, review and negotiations could be extended. It could be for months that could happen. So there are some really defined ways that we learned to be able to collapse that process, and in many cases eliminate the negotiation that happens. And then the objective, of course, is maximizing wallet share. So let's first talk about bundling options and best practices. The one thing that I find interesting is you want to start with what's the whole solution for your buyer. So many companies have a partial solution. So for instance, you may offer a solution that helps companies on the construction side. And it may be doing a number of things. It may help them with bidding. It may help them with suppliers and subcontractors. But it may not be the total solution. It may not include project management solutions or dashboards and visibility to the operations or QA. So consequently, your buyer is thinking about what's the whole solution that they need. So the more you can gravitate to the whole solution in your bundle, the better off you're going to be. And by the way, the bundle could include third-party solutions. Another thing that you've seen, because as you may know, Craig and I, we led a company called Intact, which is a software as a service company. We partnered successfully with Salesforce. We went to market. We added typically 1,500 new clients a year. So a lot of new clients, both direct as well as indirect. And we use something called progressive bundling. What that basically means is that you typically have a set of bundles that are available to each customer or prospect. And whether you call that the bronze, silver, gold version or something else, you basically have ability to move them up the sphere of spectrum, if you will, of thinking about what additional services or capabilities can they get from you as they become more advanced in terms of the use of your technology, the use of your solutions. So we're going to walk through an example of that. We're going to also talk about bundling intelligently by function or persona. So if your target audience is focused around the CFO, or it's focused around the facility manager at in the healthcare institution, how do you create the right bundle for that persona? So let's go ahead and talk through each of these areas. And I'm going to give you an example in each one too. The first is defining the whole solution. One of our customers is AvidXchange. AvidXchange provides a solution to help manage the complete invoice to pay process. And so when you think about what they're doing today, they're not only managing the invoicing process in the B2B companies that they serve, but they're also helping to manage the payment and the complete end-to-end process. So what they've done a really good job of, as we've worked with them, is they really help, sorry about that, they help their prospect think through the complete solution. So this is a solution on the left, really before AvidXchange is involved. A very manual, very intensive solution, very timely and labor-intensive solution. And on the right, you can see where AvidXchange is providing value. Now, what they're really doing a good job of is they're thinking about what's the whole solution. So they're realizing there are things that you're still going to do as a company today that may be outside their system, but from an operational perspective or from a strategic workflow, they're thinking about how do you get the job done because it's a unified process. So defining the whole solution is really important. I know that when I was the CEO at Intech, we realized that there were markets that we wanted to get into where we didn't have the complete solution. And so when we wanted to get into the market of selling to professional services companies, we didn't have a professional services module for them. So we partnered with another company and integrated that solution with our accounting solutions, then to provide the services to go after and provide the end-all solution for PSOs or professional services organizations. So think about that as you think about your company. I'll bet you that the whole solution always can grow in the future. Let's talk about progressive bundling. So progressive bundling, one of our customers is Visibility Software. They are a leader in the HR space. And when we began working with them, they have two solutions, the applicant tracking system and the training management system that they would provide companies, B2B companies, to help them in terms of both recruiting talent and then training that talent. So as we've worked with them to think about that, it's not only that you're finding the talent, which is the recruitment perspective, but then you're onboarding the talent in terms of providing them the skills, the competencies, and training that they need. And then you're growing the talent. So as we looked at creating this process of bundling, we really looked at three different areas: find, onboard, and grow. And so this last area is an area that we worked with them to add, which is around the key metrics that you're going to use to track and manage your talent. And so it becomes this virtual circle where you think about how do you get the right people, how do you get those right people trained and fully productive, and then how do you monitor this on an ongoing basis? So this became the progressive bundle. So you may just start with recruitment for today, or you may say my biggest area is training. But together working with Visibility Software, we looked at providing the full solution as well as the individual areas to be addressed for HR VPs and directors. So it's another way to think about that as far as progressive bundling. Let's talk about bundling intelligently by persona or function. This is one of our customers, Dude Solutions, which includes ScooDude. And a number of years ago, Lee, who's the president for the company, sat down with us, with Craig and I, and he said, guys, my challenge isn't penetrating the education market. My challenge is wallet share. And so we asked him what that meant. And he says, we have over 6,000 higher education institutions, universities, community colleges, schools that are current customers for us. When we started this endeavor, when we started the company, we had one solution, really a solution focused around managing assets for facility managers. But over time now, we now have 15. So we have 15 different point solutions. And our challenge is that what we have today is a typical customer may have 3 of those out of the 15. So how can we intelligently go back to our customer base and help them look at the value that we can deliver in an integrated fashion to upsell, cross-sell with them? So what we did is we looked at what they wanted to accomplish, and we said, what really makes sense is bundling your solutions by function. So if you're providing these solutions by function, well, what are the solutions or the modules that are integrated today that are going to help you manage facilities for the facility manager? And then what are the solutions that you offer around managing energy, the energy for these facilities? And that may find its way into the facility management space in the university, or it may be a separate area around energy and energy efficiency. They also had created some some phenomenal tools for the IT organization to manage all of the IT assets. So we wanted to provide the director and the CIO for these organizations the right bundle. And then finally, looking at managing all of these assets, which was looking at how you look at this from a capital perspective for the finance group. And then the final area is managing all events. So universities, community colleges, they put on tons and tons of events, both virtual as well as physical events. And so what we ended up doing with them is creating these bundles and then going back with their sales team and providing monthly webinars, monthly lunch and learns and chats with their customer base to talk about the value of the integrated bundle. We also equip their sales organization going forward with new customers to provide that from the get-go so that you didn't have these orphan products out there that weren't purchased. Let's talk about another area that you can think about bundling. And this is Intact. So as you may know, we built Intact, and Intact was acquired by the Sage Group for $850 million for really a good outcome for everybody involved. But we continue to build a suite of financial applications. We built materials management, inventory, procurement, order management applications. And then we added project management, time and billing, and client expenses for these services organizations. Like most companies, and many of you today, the solutions were really great at managing transactions and managing workflows and the operational efficiencies in the companies. But what occurred to us is that we really hadn't included the CFO as a decision maker in the process. So what we ended up doing is building executive dashboards and providing the CFO with really the key metrics that they wanted to see to manage the entire business. Once we did that, there's two things that happened. Number one is it completely changed the sales process for our sales team, because what ended up happening is that they led with the dashboards, they led with the strategic value, and a CFO could sit in the front of that presentation for the first 15 minutes, understand that. And normally what would happen is they would say, I want this system, I want this solution. And by the way, those dashboards are great. It gives me exactly what I'm looking for. And I'll take the transactional applications, by the way, on top of that. So it changed the process. Now, because we had 300 different sell-through partners, we also provided our dashboarding technology to them too. So they took their systems along with ours and started using the dashboards to do the same thing. So if you were a RealPage and you were providing your solution for property management companies, it was not only accounting information from Intact, but it was also property management information from their own mission critical applications that they could provide in the dashboards. So it completely changed their cycle as a partner as well as ours too. Let's talk about one more way to bundle. And another one of our clients is ICUC. So ICUC is a global social media management services company. Their customers include Starbucks, Google, Macy's, Novartis, really the big Fortune 2500 companies out there. And one of the things about ICUC that they've really done a really good job of is innovation, creating new services, because that's exactly what they are. They're 100% as a professional services company focused on social media management services for their clients. And what we were doing is we were helping them launch new services. As we would bring out new services such as social commerce or their review management solution or their customer insights, we realized that we were essentially helping them create the problem. And the problem was lots of different point solutions. So what we started looking at is why not create the social customer journey, which is what we innovated with them. And then as we did that, we realized that there were really 4 different areas of the journey that customers were at. So if I'm Google, I may want to be discovered. So that may be the main thing I want to do. So I'm going to need services to actually help me basically be discovered. But if I'm Macy's, I may say, I want to stand out versus other retailers out there. So how do I use social listening and content to basically do that. If I'm Novartis, I may say my biggest issue is converting the sale. So I don't want to just do social for social purposes. I want to do social so that it converts into sales. Or I want to basically be in a situation where I do a better job monitoring the reviews because we're a pharmaceutical company, and I want to basically be in a position to understand if there's any type of allergic reactions that are posted socially, that I can deal with those very quickly. Or you could say, oh, that's great. Now, what happens if I'm Starbucks? How do I grow customer influence with my customers? Because I've got a lot of customers coming into our stores every day. So how do I create a better community? How do I take care of my customers socially as they're involved with our stores, with our community, and with all of our associates? So by doing this, we were able to take each of these different point solutions, provide something that's meaningful for all these enterprises as far as the social customer journey, and really provide a place for them to be utilized and leveraged. So these are really 5 different ways we just talked about that you can think about your bundling strategy. It's exciting to think about this, and I'm sure that you have the same opportunities within your company today. So let's talk about pricing. So pricing is one of those interesting things, and as you present your pricing for your services or solutions today, you'll probably always hear the objection, well, that price is too high. And it's always interesting because when somebody says your price is too high, they would probably say that regardless whether your pricing was $1 or $1 million, because it's just knee-jerk reaction that you get from people. So one of the things that we found is tie your pricing to the value received. If you do that, then pricing doesn't become an issue. If you don't do that, then pricing is always looked at to be a way for it to negotiate, a starting point, if you will. Now, many companies we work with have lots of different ways that they will license their solutions, their services. Some are still using perpetual licenses. Some are using term licenses. Some are fully focused on subscriptions. And others are thinking about, sometimes breaking out maintenance and support as separate line items. And also some folks are using tiered services. So, which I'm a big believer of too, because I think everybody that you work with today is going to be needing different services at different levels. So depending upon where they're at. One of the things that I would say that is really important is don't present one pricing option, present 3. Now, sometimes people will say, well, doesn't that create confusion? And it can when you provide your prospect with 3 different versions. But it changes buyer behavior. So let's just talk about this for a second. If I provide one price quote to you, then you're going to look at that and say, well, that's great. How do I lower that cost? So let's talk about that. Let's negotiate. Now, if I present 3 pricing options to you, each of them that would be appropriate for you, but offer maybe different value, what you're going to do is you're going to change from a negotiating strategy to, wow, there's 3 options here. I've got to figure out which one's the best for me. So then that's where I need to focus my energy. So that's something we really find. And I wanted to walk you through an example. One of our customers is Technical Toolboxes, and they are really, truly a leader in engineering performance solutions. They focus on the energy sector, and they have a portfolio of different solutions that they provide to engineering teams. So they do a great job in terms of doing that. One of the things that they do is they have term agreements with their clients, typically 3-year agreements, and those come up for renewal all the time. And so one of the things that we work with them on is to create a bronze, silver, gold option. So the bronze version would be renewing essentially where you're at today and looking at maybe a little bit of growth based upon the next 3 years. But then we also said, why not stretch? Why not look at creating another version that provides additional value and services to your clients based upon what they need, and then take that to the full breadth. Offer them an enterprise version So now what happens is it's really great in terms of seeing how behavior's changed with their customers because the customers now realize, hey, I'm getting choice here. I'm getting opportunities to look at what's going to be best for our engineering organization. And you're now thinking through all the things that I need, not only the solutions, but the services too. Another reason why I think that having these pricing options is really important is because when you think about pricing from this perspective, one of the things that we find is that most of you have been exposed to Jeffrey Moore and the adoption curve that Jeffrey Moore talks about. So at the beginning is those early adopters for your service. Next come the early majority for your service. Then on the back end of that curve is what they call the late majority, and then finally the laggards. So what we found for a lot of companies is the level of services may increase as you move through that adoption curve. So for the early adopters, they may see themselves as, just work with me, be a co-creator. Let me figure out what we want to implement here together. Let's figure out the solution. The early majority are saying, well, this is good, but I need your help to implement this. I need your help to put this in. I may need your best practices to do that. The late majority on the adoption curve are saying, hey, that's great, but how can you actually do this for me? So do this in such a way so that you take away my risk. So that may be based upon, you've got 3 customers just like me in my industry where you've done this for, and you've done this over and over again, so you really get this, so I don't have any risk going into this process. And the laggards may say, I actually don't want the service, or I don't want your platform. What I want instead is the results. So could you offer me a managed services option and do this for me and provide me with the results instead of me having to do this myself? So this is a great example where pricing can be tiered based upon the needs of your audience. Let's talk about the third area, contracting. Contracting is just one of those phenomenally interesting areas and probably one of the most overlooked areas. So one of the things that we looked at is how can you accelerate the contracting process? So what's happened for most companies is the contractual terms and conditions that you have today have increased. If you have a license agreement, that's one agreement. If you have a services agreement, that's another one. If you have a software license agreement, or if you have a service level agreement, so for instance, you may are providing subscriptions. So if you're providing a solution in the cloud, you may have an SLA that says, here's the service level that we're going to guarantee. And then of course, all of us have privacy agreements and other agreements. The challenge is if you take all those agreements and you provide that to a prospect, they're going to take it over to their legal department and they're going to sit down and say, review all this and figure out what we want to change. Now that could take months to go through that process. And so what you want to do instead is you want to figure out how do you automate this and how do you reduce the amount of negotiations that are going to happen. Now, if you're dealing with Fortune 500 companies, chances are you're still going to have some negotiation. But we did this at Intact. We said, let's figure out how we can reduce this. So what we ended up doing is we reviewed all of our T's and C's. We have a partner of ours, Rich Gerald, who came from a business development background that really understands about being the acceleration department, not the customer prevention department, from a legal perspective. And so we worked with him to understand how can we take our T's and C's, how do we streamline them? How do we add industry best practices? And then how do we move forward so we can take those T's and C's and put them on the website? So essentially what we did is we came up with an accelerated contracting program. What we do is we develop the best agreements. We move our clients to the order form so that the client gets the order form and basically checks off the boxes of accepting the T's and C's on the website. And then the focus is not on negotiating the T's and C's. The focus is on making sure we've secured the right services, the right solutions for the client. What we found is it reduced our negotiations by 90%. That's just phenomenal, phenomenal change for us in terms of how to think about this differently. And I think it would be the same thing for you too. So if you haven't done this, it'd be really something to consider. But again, we're thinking out of the box here in terms of today's webinar. So we wanted to talk about what you wanted to get out of today, which is moving from tactical to strategic bundling options. And we just walked you through 5 examples of how to bundle differently. We talked about changing buyer behavior. And the way you do that is by giving your buyer options that make sense to them. It also means that you may tier your services based upon their competency to absorb your service or solution today. So you help them in terms of their readiness for your service or solution. And then contracting, there are a lot of ways to reduce your contracting cycle that you have today. So what I'd like to do at this stage right now is just open this up for questions and answers that you may have on today's webinar. And really think through what are the ways that you could apply some of the thoughts that we have today. So let me go ahead and open up our question panel here. And go ahead and post questions that you may have, and I'm happy to address them. This is Christy. Christy says, what's the best way to test our bundling strategy? That's a good question, Christy. So when you think about bundling things differently, you may have joined us before when we talk about gaining buyer intelligence. So buyer intelligence is where you go out and you talk to, let's say, 50 or 100 buyers in your target audience, and you engage with them in this buyer intelligence survey where you're testing out different methods. Now, pricing and bundling is one of those great areas to test out because you can get immediate feedback in a statistically relevant way about what your audience likes and doesn't like about your options. The great thing about doing buyer intelligence with your target audience is you're not making promises and you're not trying something out that may not work. What you're really doing is you're getting a large group of people in your target audience to weigh in on your bundling, pricing, and contracting strategy. So that's a great question. Let's see, what's the next question here? This one is from Danielle. So Danielle is asking, where do I start with this strategy? So in terms of it, you can start anywhere that we talked about. I think one of the best places to start is really thinking through and going back and looking at who you're selling to and what's the whole solution that they need. So sometimes what I find today is, since we live in everything's a service today world, there may be other solutions out there that are provided as a service that you could combine with your services today. So think about that and be open to that, because I think that more and more companies are thinking about how to integrate other people's technologies and services into their solution and come up with a total bundle. And if you need help facilitating that discussion, we're always here at On-Demand Advisors to help you think through that, facilitate the conversation, and really gain the consensus and what's the right way to be doing that. So the consensus happens in 2 ways. One is inside the company, and then the other thing is, how do you validate that, as we did with buyer intelligence? How do you validate that with your target audience? Because that's the best way for you to be capital efficient, is don't spend a lot of money in marketing programs and sales headcount until you've got it right, until you've figured it out with your target audience. And then you can really scale and do what we talked about, put in that revenue growth engine that we shared with you earlier. Okay, great questions, and thank you very much for that. Okay. So if you're joining us for the first time, On-Demand Advisors, we are truly a revenue acceleration agency focused on B2B companies. Everything we do is about sharing with you best practices around revenue acceleration. And today, we wanted to share with you some innovations, because innovation is really thinking out of the box, thinking differently about how do you engage with your target audience and do that in a meaningful, relevant way. Your buyer is changing all the time, and you need to change with your buyer. The next area that we provide is the resources. So what we've realized is we work with our clients and help them develop their revenue growth plan, help them figure out what needs to be put in place with best practices, help them address where they have gaps. We realize that many companies don't have the headcount or the resources internally to get the job done. So we provide the resources for them. And the reason why it's so wonderful is we do that on a variable basis, keeps their costs down. We do that based upon providing experienced resources. And we do that to make sure that you can still get the job done. Because as you know, in any part of your business, whether it be finance, sales, R&D, whatever, if you don't have the right resources internally, it can stop you from succeeding in that area. And you don't want to, you want to stop your success. Another thing that we talk about with many of our attendees and many of our clients is we work with all stage companies. Some of you today are what you would call startups. Perhaps you're even pre-revenue. Some of you are looking at scaling and how do you scale in an intelligent way. And some of you are public companies. So we've had that wonderful experience working with revenue growth and acceleration with all size companies. So don't think you're too small to begin this. In fact, I would say if you're a smaller company, it's even more important than if you're a larger company, because doing things right, laying down the right groundwork, the right track, if you will, is really important so that you don't make costly mistakes that keep your company from growing. And we've created a whole series of guides that we have around revenue acceleration, revenue growth best practices. So for many clients, we always start off with strategy and thinking through the strategy, and that's why everybody on today's webinar will receive a copy of the Revenue Acceleration Map. We also help companies put together their revenue acceleration playbook. So that's really the playbook, if you will, the ABCs in terms of how do we get from here to there. So it's not unusual for us to talk to a client and them to say, we need to grow revenue by 30% year over year. Or in some cases, like AdExchange, we need to grow revenue by 100% year over year. So it's really the playbook on how do you do that? What needs to get done to make that happen? Make that not a wish, but make that not a hope, but make that a reality. In the area of marketing, we do spend a lot of time in terms of thinking through best practices. Craig and the team do an incredible job in terms of looking at marketing through your eyes, figuring out where you have gaps. Where do you want to take marketing in terms of engaging your target audience? And one of the biggest keys I find here is have a plan to go win the market. Don't compete, win. What does that mean? It means getting to 100% of your target audience. It means being in a position where you can go win the audience. Everybody in your target audience knows you exist. Everybody knows what your value propositions are. And everybody has had an opportunity to get engaged with you. On the sales side, and of course, those of you that know me know that I came up through sales before I was Chief Operating Officer and CEO. I love thinking through strategically how you're going to market, whether you're selling direct in this case, and what are the assets you're going to need to enable your sales team to succeed. So whether that's putting in the right systems, whether that's putting in a sales-driven website, and we have that website that really helps drive the sales process with your clients, whether it's in creating a sales playbook on how you're going to onboard your new sales executives and get them up to speed quickly, or whether it's a sales performance center that's created in terms of giving them all the assets and tools that they're going to need to succeed. It's all about making sure that you don't end up with the typical ABC where your A players are carrying the company and you're trying to figure out how to get the B and C players to be productive. And then finally, partners. Partners are wonderful in terms of magnifying, optimizing what you do today. Partners help you take your solution around the globe. Partners help you take your solution into markets where you don't have the organic bandwidth to do that. And so we did that at Intact, where we had 300 sell-through partners, and getting partners, the right partners, and getting the way to work with those partners in the right way becomes really important. So that's why we talk about developing the partner scorecard and choosing the right partners, the partners that truly are going to be committed to driving revenue with you. So those are some of the guides that we've created. We also hope that you'll join us at our next webinar. And this has been a really fun webinar we had today about a very specific area. But the next webinar is we're going to talk about more holistically about how do you build a predictable revenue growth and lead generation engine for your company? How do you put that map in that we talked about earlier? And so we're going to talk about that because many companies now for 2021 are now seeing the markets are opening up. Their customers are becoming more receptive to what's available from them. And they're thinking about, okay, now's the time to scale. Now's the time to put the pedal on the gas and really to accelerate our company for 2021, 2022, and going forward. Part of that should be putting in your engine. And so that's something that we love to help companies do, and we love to help you do. So again, on behalf of myself, Craig, and our entire On-Demand Advisors team that we have, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for today's webinar. I hope you enjoy this, and please reach out to us. Here's our contact information, our emails. Here's our phone number. Here's our website. Please reach out to us with any question that you have or follow-up that you need. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you. I also will make sure that each of you get a revenue acceleration guide, as we talked about today. And then please join us for our next webinar coming up at the end of the month, where we're really going to talk about how do you put this engine in place and how do you scale that for your company. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you very much.